at Centerville High School. We hope you have a very successful year of 1934. By way of introduction, I'm Mr. Paul Johnson. I've been hired by the Centerville School District to teach European and American history and American literature. I'll give you just a little brief background of myself so you know a little bit more about me. I was born in 1911 here in Centerville. My father was a Swede. He worked in the coal mine for 40 years. I graduated from high school in 1928. That's just 6 years ago. I worked in town as a shoe salesman as my senior year of high school, and for 1 year after I graduated. Then I attended college for the next 4 years, Augustana College in Rock Island, Illinois. I did the normal things that most college students do. I didn't study enough at times. Other times I stayed up and burned the midnight oil to pass the test, no different than any other student who's gone to college. I graduated in 1933, and we were, as you will know, in the midst of a Great Depression. I returned to Centerville. I couldn't find full-time employment, so I did odd jobs. I again went to work in the shoe store, and I did some substitute teaching. In the summer of 1934, the school district hired me full-time as a teacher of the subjects I've already mentioned. And my salary was the large sum of $75 a month. And I'm looking forward to having a very enjoyable career here at Centerville. Now, with all of you here, please turn around once completely. Turn completely around. Thank you. You all have just aged 31 years. Do you feel any older? The year is now 1965, and that's the year my wife, Marcia, best friend I've ever had, and our 2 daughters moved to Centerville. I was hired by the Centerville School District as a high school band director. That's when I first met Paul. I'll back up and give you a little bit of his background. In 1934, he saw it until 1942, at which time he went into the military service. He was in for 4 years. He attained the rank of a master sergeant, and most of his work was done stateside in clerks duties. He attained the rank of master sergeant. He finished his military career in the Philippines. He came back in 1946 and returned to the school district and taught until 1957 as a teacher. And he taught primarily the 3 subjects that he introduced you to back in 1934. In 1957, he stepped up or stepped down, depending on your point of view, to be high school principal. And he maintained that job until 1976. So consequently, if you're doing the math, I worked for Paul as my boss, quote unquote, for 11 years. He retired, as I said, in 1976. He visited, as all administrators do, classrooms various times of the year to offer suggestions as to how that particular teacher whom we visited could improve his or her teaching style. And Paul did this to me, and I found it very beneficial. Paul was the first to say, I didn't know anything about music. That's why we hired you. But I asked Paul, I said, I don't need to know what a quarter note is. What I need to know from you, Paul, is am I speaking too fast? Am I speaking not clearly? Am I taking too long to make a certain point? And Paul always gave me very commendable and objectionable and very helpful suggestions for my pedagogy and my style of teaching. I'm sure many other teachers who worked with Paul could say the same thing about him. He was a true gentleman, and I loved to have him as a principal. We had very, very few differences of opinion, and those were philosophical. In 1976, or 1975, excuse me, Bill Owens, who was president of the Centerville School Board, and the school board, voted to honor Paul since his retirement was coming up the next spring in 1976. And as I'm sure most of you know here, that honor was bestowed on Paul by naming the athletic field at Lakeview School in the Paul and Johnson Field. For that was the opening football game in 1976. We played Davis County. We were behind at the halftime, but Paul corrected that by accepting, along with his very gracious wife Ruth, at halftime, from a gentleman named Bernie Sagal, who was executive director of the Iowa High School Athletic Association, headquartered in Iowa. Jack Holenshell was superintendent at the time. It was a very, very fitting tribute to Paul, because he was a great supporter of all activities in school. He never missed an athletic event, unless it was due to sickness or another conflict. He made every concert we ever had. He attended many, many academic meetings. Just a fine gentleman to work for. It was said of him by many teachers that he knew every student's name in high school. Paul refuted that. I asked him about it one time, and he said, "Yeah, I don't know everybody. I try to," but he says that some of them I miss. And I've noticed Paul oftentimes in the morning before school would start, standing in a hall pulling monitor duty, would talk to the students and mention their first names. He knew their names. And he took great pride in that. And the students loved him because of that. 1976 he retired. He was very devoted to God, his community, and his school. He had a wonderful wife, Ruth. They were married, you can tell that from your program you have. They had 3 children, all of whom I had the pleasure of having in my band program, Mark, David, and Tim. And I won't go into their backgrounds, it takes too much time here today. So Paul was very community-minded, Rotarian, stellar church member, volunteered for many, many activities. I think the greatest tribute in Paul's estimation was having an athletic field named after him. So you all join me, I'm sure, in believing that Paul still lives on. Thank you.